Hello, and welcome to MUSE Meets 2021. I'm Kelly Suazo, Director of Publisher Relations at Project MUSE. I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement that Project MUSE respectfully acknowledges and gives thanks to the Piscataway tribe, the indigenous people who are the traditional owners of the lands of the Chesapeake Bay region. We also acknowledge all indigenous peoples, the traditional owners of the lands and waters of the United States of America. We are very excited to bring together this amazing group to envision what's next, to talk about the top issues facing publishers and librarians today. Back in January, we invited you to participate in a brainstorming exercise on the IdeaScale platform. Moving remotely has given us all, I think, both an opportunity to explore different online platforms, as well as, I'm sure, some platform fatigue. So we are really grateful to those who participated and posted ideas and comments, which helped shape the discussion topics for this panel today, as well as Friday's panel. While 2020 challenged us in ways we never expected, it has been a powerful reminder that we are all in this together. Every voice in the scholarly publishing community has value, and we are strongest when we work together to envision the future and ensure the growth of digital humanities and social science content for years to come. I'd now like to introduce Celeste Feather, who will kick off and moderate this discussion with plenty of time for audience questions at the end. Celeste Feather is the Senior Director of Content and Scholarly Communication Initiatives at Lyrasis, where she leads a team of experts who negotiate group licenses for online content, manage persistent identifier communities, and work with mission-aligned partners to develop new models for scholarly communication. Prior to joining Lyrasis in 2010, she gained expertise through a variety of positions at university libraries and a statewide library consortium. Just a reminder to please type your questions in the Q&A section. Now over to Celeste.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I would like to start with brief introductions to our panelists who have been most generous in sharing their time and thoughts to help shape our conversation today. Greg Yao is the president of the Center for Research Libraries, responsible for setting strategic directions and directing overall CRL programming and services. Before joining CRL in 2019, Greg served as the Associate Director for Collections at the MIT Libraries and previously held appointments at the Harvard Library and Yale University Libraries. Greg currently serves on the board of the MIT Press and is a member of the American Historical Association. Sylvester Johnson is Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities and Executive Director of the Tech for Humanity Initiative at Virginia Tech. He is the founding director of Virginia Tech's Center for Humanities, which supports human-centered research and humanistic approaches to the guidance of technology. Sylvester's research has examined religion, race, and empire in the Atlantic world, religion and sexuality, national security practices, and he is currently writing a book on human identity in an age of intelligent machines and human-machine symbiosis. Liz Mingle is the Associate Director, Collections and Academic Services at the Johns Hopkins University Sheridan Library. She is actively engaged in collection development and management as both a practitioner and from a strategic institutional values perspective as part of her role on the library's senior management team. Liz is also active in the library assessment community and has held prior positions at Rice University and Shell Oil Company. Frances Penter has a long and storied career in publishing. She is currently the executive chair of the Central European University Press and previously the CEO of Manchester University Press. Frances was the founding publisher of Bloomsbury Academic and the founder of Knowledge Unlatched, taking a particular interest in developing sustainable business models for open access monographs. Karen Wolf is the director of the Omohundro Institute of Early American History and Culture, which publishes the William and Mary Quarterly, the leading journal in early American scholarship. She is also professor of history at the College of William and Mary and co-chair of the college's Neurodiversity Working Group. Her scholarship focuses on women, gender, and family in the early modern British Atlantic. So as we turn our thoughts to the topic for conversation today, I want to set the stage by acknowledging the basic tenets that grew out of our conversation as we prepared for this event. We believe that HSS disciplines are poised to make major contributions in our efforts to address global challenges and global affairs in ways that foster positive outcomes. We also believe that approaches that embody diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility will be the most impactful ones. The future of information sharing and dissemination depends on the way that we address these global and society issues. In her opening keynote yesterday, Kathleen Fitzpatrick encouraged us to think and lead generously. How will the HSS scholarly publishing community contribute to the betterment of humanity going forward, having learned lessons from this pandemic and gained a deeper understanding of the sociocultural realities that can aid or thwart progress? Someday someone will write the story of the way the humanities and social science disciplines contributed to this era. What do we want that story to include? We'd like to open our discussion with a focus on engagement and then move on to infrastructure and innovation. As Kelly mentioned, please do type your questions in the Q&A section as they occur to you, and we'll focus on them after our panelists have shared their perspectives. So the pandemic happened, and in truth, we don't yet know when it will end. In the beginning, a lot of content was opened and made free to read, and all metrics indicate that it was widely used. So what do we do with the information we gathered? Are there new understandings we can share with others? And what questions do we need to ask? And what else do we need to be learning from this experience? Liz, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts to start us off.
Thank you. It's hard to follow Kathleen's talk yesterday, but we'll do the best we can. So I think with what happened during the pandemic, with the content that was opened, it confirmed a few things for me. So it confirmed what I think many librarians know, is that research institutions have an insatiable appetite for information. It also, I think, confirmed that the market is bigger than what libraries' budgets are, and that there can be a powerful what can happen when there's a lot of collaboration between libraries and publishers to get that information out. What I'd like to see publishers do, or try to do, is do some kind of deep dive into the data that was collected during that time to understand, and if possible, combine the kind of data from multiple publishers to see what the trends may have been and where they may see things happening. It would be really interesting to see if 5-10 years down the road what the citations might look like from this time period and how this open impacted that. But I don't know how you would track that data at this point, the way we do things. I also think it would be good to understand how patrons discovered the content. I know a lot of libraries put that content into their catalogs, others didn't. How did the discovery systems help or not help find the open content? And I think there's still a lot of questions around that kind of discovery of the open content.
Sylvester, what about you? What questions should we be addressing as we think about what happened in the past year and how we need to move forward?
Yeah, this has been, well, first, thanks for the invitation. Excited to be on the panel and for the event. It's really exciting and urgent issues that you've outlined. I think one of the high level phenomenon that we have seen in the past year plus is the importance of the technology, the role that it's played. We are having this panel right now because of digital platforms. It has made it possible for people to be able to engage one another, to communicate, and that includes scholarly communications. The urgency and the importance of digital access to archival materials, to databases for scholarly content has been important for a long time. But what we saw in the past 14 to 16 months has really accelerated what was a pre-existing trend. And that is the growth of digital technologies, the importance of access, and with it, the challenge of the material content and structures that come with that, computing access, the resources that are involved. And so if there were ever any doubt before, I don't think there was much doubt, but if there were ever any doubt about the growing importance of digital innovation and digital resources for scholarly communication, for libraries, for curation, for the research That hopefully that is fully dispelled now. That doesn't mean that everything is digital. It has never meant that. It does mean that the reality, the ground shift, the tectonic structures that support almost everything we do have been moving in this direction for some time. And I don't think anyone should be skeptical that that trend is only going to continue. And so that raises some important questions about how we're going to ensure and secure the future of scholarly communications. We will, I'm sure we'll talk more about budgets later on, but the digital technology is not cheap. It's very costly. No one anticipated that our legacy institutions, no one 40 years ago anticipated that our legacy institutions today would have to expend such a huge proportion of our financial resources in order to make it possible for us to do the things we do. With the cost of the technology, that's everything from the fiber that runs through our campuses to the hosting services that make possible almost everything we do. The cloud computing services that we're using right now to communicate, for example, is not cheap. And so we've got, I think, to move beyond the mindset that we're just gonna be subscribers and be tenants in a digital ecosystem in which the metaphorical landlords are really a very small number of private companies. We need these private companies. They are making it possible that we do, but we also have to rethink the value creation models that are operating in this ecosystem, and how that's going to get paid for, and who should actually be participating in the ownership of some of these resources. So that's a very difficult question. I think it requires us to rethink in fundamental ways some of the assumptions that have undergirded how our institutions have operated. And I think it's fair to say that the subscription mindset that we're just going to be tenants, that's not going to be viable for the long term. There needs to be some kind of shift in how our institutions operate so that we can secure the future viability of scholarly communication.
Thank you. So now that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibilities are headlining everywhere and at the forefront of more minds in everyday life, what more can we do to enable everyone to engage with the HSS scholarship that provides so much opportunity for exploration, understanding, and insight? Because as you were sort of mentioning, Sylvester, creating open content is just the first step. So Karen, where do you think we need to focus our efforts to deepen this engagement and increase the impact of humanities and social sciences?
Well, I want to echo Sylvester in thanking you for this invitation to participate. Sometimes I think we think, oh, those thank yous are a waste of our brief period of, our brief moments to speak, but actually I don't think they are. I think it really is important to recognize that this kind of event doesn't come out of nothing. Just like the scholarly infrastructure doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of lots of people thoughtfully working together, collaboratively in lots of different professional circumstances and situations to make something happen. That actually speaks to two things I want to draw our attention to. I think when we think about what is going to be the impact of HSS content going forward, how can we increase access and also increase its meaning? I'm going to avoid the word impact and say how can increase its meaning. And I want to think in two ways. One is kind of big scale, and the other is about very human scale. So the first would be that I think, you talked about the significance of HSS, even in this moment of extraordinary technological achievement, and in fact, in some ways, technological dependence, Celeste and Sylvester both. But I think it's absolutely vital that we continue to say at every possible turn that none of that is possible, none of that is meaningful, none of that is significant without a humanities in particular perspective. We must have that. These things go hand in glove. We know that some of the greatest issues that are facing our society and longstanding ones, bias, racism, harm, violence, come out of things that are being actually amplified through technology. We've absolutely got to stick to the fact that humanities and social sciences give us a perspective on technology, and that ramifies throughout the scholarly infrastructure. throughout our kind of ecosystem. I was thinking about this Inside Higher Ed survey that was posted yesterday about provosts, talking about how 84% of provosts acknowledge that a liberal arts education is vital for undergraduates, and yet they also say that their boards and politicians want STEM because they think that guarantees jobs. But we know that HSS is what's necessary for a healthy democratic society. We cannot lose any opportunity to advance that essential point. And then secondly, on a kind of more human scale, just to think about, as we are thinking about the histories of institutions, the history of knowledge production itself, as we are in a moment of reflecting on how knowledge itself has come out of institutional histories of bias and harm, I think it's really important that we think about the communities that we live and work in. And we think about how we are engaging with and relating to and learning from the communities that we are in. So yes, I think we want to think about open content for the world at large, but I also think we want to think about what kinds of knowledge are we producing for the communities where we live, and that in many ways have supported and in lots of ways been harmed by the institutional structures of knowledge that we have created.
Thank you. So then how do we expand the conversation and create opportunities to hear new voices as we exchange ideas? And Greg, I'm going to lean on you for this one because I know that your work at CRL leads you right into the heart of this question.
Sure. Well, I'll just jump in and build on some comments that have already been made, and just start off this by saying thank you for putting together this conversation. Thank you, not only because I think it's an enjoyable and necessary conversation, but I believe that when we talk about infrastructure, social capital, relationships, paradigms, shared mission, that is infrastructure. And so Project Muse putting together this conversation, representing scholars and publishers and librarians, building that community and building that community infrastructure so that we can move forward and address common challenges and take advantage of common opportunities as a community committed to research-based knowledge production, infused with the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important. So I think that the being part of this conversation and this community, this research-based community, is really, 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 really critical. So when I think about this COVID moment, and I think about the biggest impact on my thinking and my organization, and what I hope that our collective humanistic qualitative social science community comes out of the crisis with, is a new mental map and understanding of the opportunities that we have to remake our institutional frameworks. So here's the thing. So I'm an historian by training, and that's probably the professional identity that's deepest to me. And I've never known a moment as an historian that wasn't defined by crisis of the humanities. Mm. And as a librarian, I've been a librarian for over 20 years. I've never known a single moment of my professional life that hasn't been defined by crisis and ScholComm, right? And so, and then now, and I'm on the board of the MIT Press, and of course, so I'm keenly aware of the crisis in academic, press publishing. And over this last year, as I've been navigating, as we've all been navigating a really scary, an immediate crisis, I've been really framing, I've been thinking about the construct of crisis in a whole new way. And I don't think that the former crisis in humanities or scholarly publishing, I don't really see them as crisis anymore. I see that as condition. It's a condition where previous institutional frameworks, professional identities, they're showing some fragility, and we have an opportunity to remake them. And that's what we need to do. I want us as a community to redefine the boundaries between disciplines, between professional communities, so that we can come together as a community of publishers, librarians, scholars committed to humanistic research production in a collaborative way. Because as Sylvester says, the opportunities are very real, but they're very expensive. So if we come together, that's really, really really important. So when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and bringing more voices to the table, at least for my initial remarks, I'll just focus on this community, the folks on this call and in this audience coming together and sharing their voices.
Okay. Karen, do you have more thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Greg said. Well, first of all, obviously about being a historian, but then about coming together around this table, because I think the question is, what is the table, you know? And where do we all sit at that table? And one of the things that I think is quite important as we embrace the opportunities of this moment, as we think about, as Kathleen Fitzpatrick said yesterday and in her very eloquent book, we think about thinking generously, leading generously. I think we have to remake that table. You know, it's been, I'm going to go with a bad metaphor here. It has looked less like a table than like Lucy and Ethel on the candy, production thing, and everybody lined up. And we really need a round table, or we need a hollow table, or we need something where there's so many more people there and where we really all see one another. Because I think one thing that holds us back is when we don't really appreciate what others do in this whole knowledge production, when we don't really understand one another's professional expertise and responsibilities and obligation, whether it's editors or librarians or all of the multiple things, facets that are within that. I think if we are generous with one another, we think about acknowledging the expertise that we don't have, that somebody else has, we're less likely to go for big unified monolithic solutions and better able to think through how can we collectively come up with some, you know, kind of movement, some kind of more community-based approaches. So that's my pitch for a differently shaped table, I guess.
Great, thank you. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015 envision a world founded on respect for cultural and linguistic diversity. Some of the relevant themes in these goals are the humanity and the environment, climate change, cultural identity, gender inequality, cultural heritage, history, borders, and migration, and more. Many colleges and universities are embedding these goals into their campus programs, curriculum, and other activities. How can HSS publishers and scholars align with these topics to ensure that these research areas have continuing impact in a changing world? And Frances, I'm going to ask you to speak to this.
Thank you very much, Celeste, and thank you to everybody at Project MUSE for putting on this occasion. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I think there are many ways in which HSS publishers and scholars can align with the UN Sustainability Development Goals. We need to take some of the lessons learned over the past year with us, especially what we did last spring, making everything open. We know now that the turbocharged speed of developing the vaccines was helped by opening up content. Experts were being listened to despite certain administrations, but we needed more understanding of how people behave. Indeed, scientists were really perplexed as to why politicians were not acting on clear and unambiguous scientific advice. Social scientists, on the other hand, contribute to our understanding that politics is fraught and contestation as to who gets what is part of everyday life. And much of our understanding of the fear that drives behavior comes from a number of HSS disciplines. So we need more HSS voices heard at the top table, at all tables actually, but particularly the top table. Indeed, there's an acronym I've been seeing around recently that I quite like. It's called SHAPE. It stands for Social Sciences, Humanities, and Arts for People and the Economy. SHAPE needs a larger role in shaping our future. So we need to apply these lessons. And so I'll take this down into the area of open access, open science, open data, open scholarship, which is key to scholarly communications and beyond around the world, especially as to what it means for the next tsunami, which will be much bigger than COVID. And I'm talking, of course, of climate change. We urgently need coherent and credible policies that are convincing to the public. And we really need to hurry up and make the corpus of shaped knowledge open so that global, regional, national, and local policies can be sensibly agreed and implemented. This is an area where libraries and publishers need to work together to adopt new business models that are fully inclusive of all global science and HSS subjects, including from the global south and not just what appears from the West. So for me, the only way to go forward is open. Thank you, Celeste.
Oh, sure. Greg, would you share your perspective, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just I'll build on what Francis already talked about. Now, the shape construct is new to me, and I immediately it resonates very strongly. So thank you. I've got some reading to do on that. I like it instantly. But Francis mentioned the global south, and so I'll talk a bit about, you know, I talked earlier about how I've been thinking about this construct of crisis in a new way, and I've been thinking about, well, it's more of a situation of condition. What is this current condition, and how are we going to rethink our institutional structures and missions in this condition? And as I think about what this condition is, I increasingly think about it as the condition of post-coloniality. And really engaging with the UN, which is really a post-colonial, a construct, is very, very helpful in centering a post-colonial mindset to publishing and scholarship and knowledge production. And I think that's incredibly a powerful construct. And I really believe deeply and passionately about centering the values of diversity, equity, inclusivity. But I think when I think about publishing and knowledge production, it's really the post-colonial framework that I think does a lot. It has a lot of explanatory power, and I think it's very, very helpful. So as we're looking at research production, scholarly production, we want to, openness is a wonderful, wonderful value. But we don't want to reduce barriers to reading and barriers to openness that allows for more global North voices and voices from well-resourced places to fill the room. Right? We want to have a scholarly production ecosystem that allows many voices to actively to participate. And so there's knowledge production from the global south, in the global south, that needs audience in the global north. So it is so. And how do we build institutions that is first mindful of that, but then also inclusive of those voices? And so I think that really using that UN sustainability framework as a framework and as a model to think through what we're doing and the path ahead is really, really, really powerful. And really thinking about that post-colonial framework as a powerful one. You know, I'll say I'll interject one last thing about that. I'm a very keen, consumer of scholarship around post-coloniality. Like I love that scholarship, and I engage with it at a theoretical level. But post-coloniality is a geographic and temporal reality. It's a real thing. It's operational. And so when my father is Chinese by way of Malaysia, when he was sent to the UK for boarding school, when he was 12 years old, he had a passport that he was a subject of the Queen. Right. So when my Chinese father from Malaysia went to go to grammar school in the UK with his passport saying you're a subject of the Queen to go study, some medicine in Europe. So so post-coloniality in terms of knowledge production and what voices are included and how they're included, it's not really just a theoretical reality. It's here and now, and it's grounded. It's operational.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'd like to move on now to think about infrastructure and innovation that's needed there. And certainly all of us would like to increase the reach and the impact of the scholarly publishing community's work. But the question is, will our current models actually support these goals? And specifically, are there new models to create HSS content in open access that we should be exploring and developing? And Liz, I'd like to turn to you first for this one.
So I think the easy answer is yes, there are. I think what those are much harder to define and to figure out at this point. I think from Kathleen's talk yesterday, she said open access requires solidarity above the institution, and I think that's incredibly important. I read recently something, and I can't remember where it was or who said it, so I'm hoping if I'm quoting someone on the panel, thank you very much. If I, to whoever may have said this, I'm sorry, I didn't remember to write it down, but I'm kind of paraphrasing it. They said the affordability of academic material is seen as a library problem, not as a scholarly communications problem or an academy problem. And I think that fits into an analogy I use probably way too many times within my organization is, it's like we're trying to solve a big complex algebra problem, but we're only working on one side of the equation. And what little I remember from algebra, you have to be working on both sides of the equation. And sometimes I'm not even 100% sure we're really knowing what X is that we're trying to solve. I work in a very practical position. I negotiate and I pay bills, and we do what we can to try to get content in the door. I worry constantly that we seem to be moving from one unsustainable model to another. There's the explosion of science journals, and then I have thousands of never used books sitting in our collection. And we have APCs that are way outpacing libraries' budgets. So if the only way for publishers to make more money is to put out another new journal, then we really have problems there. Kathleen's talk, I think, said that changes are huge and can't necessarily be done incrementally. We have to go back and do the work above the institution. So I think however we can start bringing this work up above the institution and looking at how we can work through our consortias and other broader context is the only way we're going to start to solve some of these problems. Some models that we've liked in our library that that may or may not work in the future, but the new Public Library of Sciences, community action publishing, we think just the transparency of what they're trying to do is amazing. The kind of subscribe to open, that works pretty well too. The idea of unlatching books, Francis's, knowledge unlatching books, that's a great idea. We also like Reveal Digital's model and how they tell you exactly what their costs are to digitize something, and we work to build to open that up. I think those work. They're kind of they're transparent, and we can see what's going on, and we can become a part of them. And I think that's all I have to say about that right now.
Okay, thank you. So, Francis, it occurs to me that you have a special personal history of developing new models for sustaining scholarly publishing. So what do you think we need now? I think you're on mute.
Okay, so we're a long way from the days when I wandered around libraries all over the world, seeing empty shelves and crying almost over the paucity of materials all over the world. We can fix this. And we are in a period of experimentation of various models. And I expect a number will be sustainable, some won't be. But we have to remember that books are a staple of HSS subjects, but not so in STEM. Big difference. Books are produced in a different publishing ecosystem. And there are many smaller publishers in HSS subjects. Just looking at the number of publishers in the DOAB, that's the Director of Open Access Books, there's 602 of them. And in the DOAJ, there are only 100. Well, that's an eye-opener. It tells us that HSS authors are choosing to publish with a larger range of smaller publishers than STEM authors. What do we do in that context? So just a few points here. I think you'll be one of the things that shouldn't happen is trying to adopt the large transformative deals for journals to books. It's a death sentence for monographs. It may work for large publishers and wealthy institutions, but it'll leave so many people out in the cold. Liz is saying, no, it may not even work for big institutions. But another point, tracking usage by individual institutions and applying the same selection criteria as journals, again, this will kill monographs. Let me explain why. One little sample here. Last spring, 279 of our titles were in MUSE's open access initiative. Downloads soared, I'm very happy to say. Very interestingly, 7 out of the top 10 were over 10 years old. This tells us the life cycle of monographs doesn't even remotely resemble that of journal articles. So what we need is a collective commitment to flip funding from supporting closed ways of acquiring books to open ones. And if I may, I'm going to tell you about a little initiative that we're running at the CEU Press, which I fully confident can scale. It's a subscribe to open and membership scheme that we're running in partnership with MUSE, with Lyrasis, JISC. We have support from COPIM, which is a UKRI and a Arcadia Foundation supported initiative to move books towards OA. In a nutshell, the front list titles are made OA by asking libraries to subscribe to a package of backlist titles. All the money raised in this way goes towards making the front list open. The cost of supporting this, even for a library that has all or most of our backlists already, is still less than half of what the front list would be costing if the libraries remained closed, if the books remained closed. And as more libraries join, the costs go down even more. So I hope the model will scale. It has the potential to seriously reduce the cost of any individual title to any individual library in the way that it has under closed basis. But it's another test of resolve, of collective action, of getting us to where we need to be. Not an OA charity, just a new model, which if libraries turn out to think that it is beneficial for them, will help everybody. But as you know, I'm very interested in trying all new models. And I do think that this particular model is good for small and medium-sized presses with a backlist. There are bigger publishers doing different things. There are newer publishers doing different things. But this is a particular area that I think has a way of opening up lots and lots of monographs. So that, I think, Celeste, that's all I can say on that point at the moment. So I'll have
Great.
conclude with
Thank you.
that.
I want to add, I really appreciate that trying the new models. And I think that is one of the things that libraries are really willing to do, is to try a lot of new models. And we are very happy supporters of the model that Frances had just mentioned.
That's really nice to hear, Liz. Thank you very much. I'm also very aware that it's a trying time for libraries to be asked to support lots of different models. You have so much else to do that coming on board with these things can be a bit testing. But I would hope that libraries would take the same view that you and your library has taken. So thank you very much.
Well, we are supposed to be learning organizations, so I think it's important that we do try things.
Right. So let's talk about infrastructure a little bit. What new infrastructure might need to be developed so that we can continue to support the shift to online learning and scholarship? How can HSS content integrate into online learning in better ways? And are there business models that would support a better integration with the technologies that we're using for instruction now, such as prepackaged content modules, more open educational resources, and so forth? And Sylvester, my guess is that you have some interesting ideas about this topic.
Yes, so as you pointed to, this is definitely a high growth area in the learning material, the way the information is being relayed through formal courses of teaching, as well as access to materials for research. And I think if we are paying attention to some of the developments that are happening in the innovation space and digital technologies, we have to appreciate both the lasting role of analog biological humans who are doing what we think of in a traditional way of humanities and social science research, where a person is gathering and collecting data and interpreting that data and producing the research. And also we have to recognize that increasingly AI, that machine learning software is actually has already been used to produce articles. Practically all of us have read things written by AIs, perhaps not knowing it. If you pick up, name your favorite newspaper or different ads that we see. But increasingly, we're going to see the kind of analytic insights that come from the use of algorithmic software being leveraged to compose what we think of as scholarly articles. And that includes social science and humanities. And so one of the big infrastructure questions is who's going to own the equity in the software, the AI, and the data sets that are being used in the analytics. This has massive implications for future revenue models. Again, we've got to move out of the subscription mindset that, well, our libraries, our universities, we don't do these things, but we train the talent that creates and runs the companies to produce this. If we don't change the game at a fundamental level in terms of the value creation models, how we're generating revenue, it has to be through continuing some of what we've done through publishing, but it also has to be in the ownership of the AI and the other software and the data that is going to get generated. And then that's connected to a couple of other things. You know, we're thinking about on a very broad scale, the infrastructure and sustainability. Our universities have always been transnational entities, even when they have had tremendous problems of excluding people based on race or gender. They've actually always been multi-regional and transnational. And we're going to have to deepen our commitment and investment in that, because right now the political grounds are moving in ways they had before that is making it more challenging for some of those global transnational collaborations to occur. And so we really have to be very deliberate in ensuring that where scholarly knowledge is concerned, where research is concerned, where teaching and learning are concerned, that our academic institutions are really holding true to something that has been very important and at the core of how we've operated, and even at the level of how we collaborate and beyond, in terms of thinking about how we are disseminating information through those structures. That has to have a transnational dimension to it. It has to be deliberate. And then if we're thinking about the connections of the infrastructure to the things that we've been talking about, of equity and diversity and inclusion and sustainability, we, I think, have to be much more keen and committed to dealing with equity in both senses of that term. You know, one sense is about fairness, and another sense is about ownership, as in home equity, for example. You know, it's how much ownership interest do you have in property? Well, the equity question, those meanings have always been connected. We have to make sure that there is an equitable level of participation, as in fair level of participation, an inclusive level of participation in the ownership of the capital infrastructures, of the owner interest in the AI. This is not against private companies. We need private companies, but we also need public institutions, and we need publicly committed capital. For example, this is what nonprofits are. It's private capital with a public mission to increasingly participate in the ownership, equity of the most high value domains that we're seeing in the generation of GDP, in the monetization of commodities, and that is in the digital realm. You know, it's data, it's AI, it's data sets. And so I think if we do that, we can actually, it will mean shifting the way we think about our legacy institutions. But if we do that, I think we can have a realistic way, a feasible path to ensuring a future viability for the sustainability of our institutions. We can have the resources to make sure that what we are producing and disseminating is actually inclusive, because it's going to take more capital than ever before for us to fulfill a equity-focused, diverse and inclusive focused mission. And we can ensure that our production of the knowledge is really going to be in a situation under conditions to thrive in a 21st century, where we will increasingly see the kind of outputs that are happening from the human cyber interface.
Great, thank you so much. Karen, do you want to share some thoughts here?
Yeah, I just want to jump in kind of quickly here. I always learn from Sylvester's comments, and I can't process them fast enough to respond, but I think I do want to echo a little bit of what's been said and push back also a little bit as well, to say that, I think a lot of what we have talked about today are, really big issues in scholarly communications, many of which are driven by STEM publishing and many of which are driven by commercial publishers. But this event is about HSS and nonprofit. And when I say I think we need to bear down on and always be loud and proud about the value of HSS and the primarily dominant nonprofit feature of HSS publishing, this is what I mean. I think it can be easy to get caught into publishing when actually we're talking about commercial and STEM publishing. But when we're thinking about the values of and how we're acting on the values of HSS nonprofit publishing, I just want to say, university presses, public mission, doing such good, important work, and in ways that help us understand the integrated nature of research production. As HSS scholars, we are, the library is our laboratory. We are collaborative with librarians and archivists. Editors are side by side. If our research output is the very arrangement of text, this particular way in which we organize our language, our editors are our collaborators all the time. Editors are not doing the work that AI will do. Sylvester's going to tell me I'm wrong about this, but I'm gonna insist that expert editors who have their own, kind of deep expertise in subject matter, which is true for lots of HSS disciplines, are really integral. So I think when we're talking about reaching for big solutions, let's not forget that the human scale is really critical to our values. And if we don't emphasize that as important, well, we lose it, right? We're not saying it, we lose it. So that was my 2 cents there, Celeste.
Great, thanks. So online, yes, but what about print? Because print is still alive and it has a future, but it might be a different kind of future. So what infrastructure innovations need to happen so that we can support the future of print content? And Liz, I'm looking to you because I know that your library shepherds a lot of print titles.
We do, and I'm even so much more aware of it right now because we are trying to gear up for a renovation. So I'm in the process of moving about 1 million volumes of print from our library to our high density shelving facility. So I am aware of every little piece of print we have in that building. We do know, though, that scholars use print and electronic differently. And one thing that I would like to see more of, and this is too, because I can't necessarily buy duplicate of every title. I can't buy a print title and the electronic version of that title. But I would like to see maybe some more print on demand being available for people who buy electronic. Can then there be a way for a scholar to buy a good, inexpensive print copy of that book if they so choose? We do have something with that with one of them, with a major commercial publisher, where we buy a ton of their ebooks, but there is a place for our scholars to be able to buy a print on demand, just a black and white paper bound book for a reasonable price, and that even includes their textbooks. So I think a way to continue to get print books out there when libraries are really busy also trying to get electronic books out there. I think, finding a way to extend our collection somehow. I know libraries catalogs and their ILS systems can be a bit clunky. The LC subject headings are a bit outdated. Is there a way to be able to have engage people in building a more social catalog so that people can find and discover things in different ways than they do now? Again, working above the institution within our consortia to think about innovative print and electronic packages so that we can get both print and electronic for scholars. And then we borrow a lot within our Ivy Plus library consortia, and there's an environmental impact on moving all of those books around. Is there different ways that we can think about where does print end up and how do we not have to be shipping it every place? So those are some things I have to think about.
Great. And Craig, what do you envision about our collective work with print in the days ahead?
Sure. Well, as a fellow librarian and a longtime colleague of Liz, I'll just say I agree with everything Liz just said. So let me just, so rather than repeat what Liz said, maybe just take it in a bit of a different direction and talk a bit more. When it comes to print, I think, as with everything, it's a time to rethink our paradigms, as Kathleen Fitzpatrick reminds us to do and invites us to do, and to think about our mental maps and think about print in new ways. And I think that when it comes to print, actually, before I talk about print, I'll talk about the power of mental maps. And I want to shine a light on some great work that you and I did together, Celeste, about 10 years ago, and really celebrate Project MUSE's work. So when I was at the Yale Library, Project MUSE was rolling out the Project MUSE ebook platform, and really fabulous scholarly content. And MUSE was rolling out this new business model to experiment with it. And I was at Yale, and you and I were working with together on whether or not Yale should purchase this ebook content. And we got the list of titles, and the librarians gathered around a table, and we looked at these titles, and we were trying to decide whether or not to purchase this content. And we started saying, well, we already have this title in print, and maybe we have 3 copies in print, and maybe we already have this in an ebook copy. And using our standard mental maps, using our workflows and our mental maps, the answer was clearly no. Let's not buy this. It duplicates content. This does not work. This is not a good investment. And I remember I looked up from that table and I said, we're asking the wrong question. We shouldn't be evaluating this content on whether or not we already have print copies or whether or not we already have ebook copies. The question before us here is whether or not scholarship is better off for having a healthy Project MUSE. Is scholarship better off for having a healthy Johns Hopkins University Press? Is scholarship better off for having these monographs and monographs like this created? And if the answer to that's yes, we're just buying all of this, and let's experiment on how on how our users respond to this content. And you probably remember this, Les, because remember we were talking about all these things. So it's about changing mental maps. And as Sylvester was saying, getting out of that subscription mindset and really asking different questions so that we're working collaboratively across this nonprofit space to address shared challenges and take advantage of shared opportunities. And with print, the question, when I really think about print, the mental map that I've been thinking about or changing is print is just a technology. Print is a technology. And in some ways, the technology of print has been superseded by digital. And in other areas, it resoundingly has not. And so when you appreciate it as a technology, then, in some ways print needs to be, scaled back, and we need to move beyond print. But in other areas, we need to continue to invest in print. I remember Jim O'Donnell, who's the librarian at Arizona State, but he's a classics professor by background and a former provost at Georgetown. So he brings lots of different perspectives to his work. But he's a classicist, and he was talking about how the codex has some technological advantages that have simply not been replicated in a digital space. And when he looks at digital books, he said, it looks to me as a classicist some of these digital reading experiences look like a roll of papyrus, right? It's like this, you can't flip back and forth. It's like this endless roll of text that you can, maybe you can just, jump in different parts, but the codex is a superior technology in some ways. And I thought that was a fun and necessary insight, but really print is a technology. And to give a shout out to our university presses, the single best book I have read on this, really changed my entire thinking about print, is an MIT Press book called The Myth of the Paperless Office. And it's such a fun book because the conceit is that it's written by a pair of engineers and scientists at Hewlett-Packard, I believe. And they thought, well, there's going to be no more paper in offices. It's been completely superseded. But as time went on, they said, all these offices are filled with paper. What's going on? So the whole conceit of the book is a couple of engineers thinking that print is dead, writing a monograph book study on the affordances of print as a technology. So I think that's just a fantastic book, and published by one of the university publishers. So.
There we go. Yes. Okay, final question, and then we'll turn to audience questions because I see a lot of those coming in. So are there key programmatic aspects of HSS publishing that we have to re-examine so that we can create improved pathways to support diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? And how can we support moving beyond our nationalistic approach and provincialism and support learning from a global purview? So Sylvester, may I please ask you to share your thoughts on this one?
Absolutely. I think we definitely need to form new kinds of connections so that our researchers, that our archivists, that those of us who are doing the teaching, the larger ecosystem of the learning that happens in scholarly knowledge is moving in a more enhanced way across national borders. We have to be very keen on the talent pipeline so that we are supporting a more diverse and inclusive faculty and administration in this. And that is both in domestic terms of what we think of domestically and also transnationally. We have an unprecedented ability now to be in communication with peoples all over the world. That's not a replacement for actually physically traveling across the world. That physical travel is actually part of building those networks, but that's going to be very important to do. I had mentioned earlier that the mission of being inclusive and achieving equitable outcomes is going to require more capital than ever before. That's real. It means making things accessible. That's not only the cost, for example, getting into colleges and universities as a student and moving through that system. It's also getting access to the information which we've been talking about. We've been talking about cost models. We've been talking about sustainability challenges. But on the international and global front, we are seeing some new challenges in that way. And so I do think that the more we can invest in our humanities and social science entities that leverage the ways that we can engage with people across the world. That might be through a digital platform, which most of us have experienced in the past year. That might be in other ways. It remains important. I think we have to be aware of political developments that are making it more challenging for international employees to be part of our universities and international students to be part of our universities. If we fall back and lose the ability to maintain the diversity of people who come through our institutions globally, that will be a tremendous loss. And so we have to be very deliberate in that way.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, we have about 15 minutes left here and a number of really great, and I will say really tough questions are coming in. So this is quite quite the response in the audience, very, very engaged, and it's great to see. So we may not have a chance to get to all of these questions, but I would encourage you, because there are breakout sessions after this too. If we don't get to your question, please bring it up again in those breakout sessions, because a number of these do certainly bear out a lot of discussion. So selecting from our list here, and I'm just going to read the question, and then any of our panelists who feel moved to respond, please raise your hand and jump in. One of them is, how can the scholarly publishing ecosystem be environmentally sustainable? And are there opportunities to engage on the environmental pieces of the UN Development Goals?
So that's certainly something that has to happen in concert with the larger structures of energy production and consumption. We are seeing a huge shift on the policy side in some of the horizon possibilities for making those changes. But it's a really important question, whether it is what we think of as the analog production and dissemination of knowledge. So through paper, print technologies, or whether it's digital, all of that requires inputs of energies and expenditures. And a lot of that has been, most of that has been carbon-based. The horizon of electrification technologies is one path to improve the impact, to have less negative, mitigate negative impacts on the environment, to have a more positive model. But electrification is not necessarily a carbonless type of technology. It depends on how electricity is getting generated. But these are macro structures. These are national collectives of policy initiatives and infrastructure building that is typically happening through private companies in Western capitalist models, and often through a more hybrid system of state and private capital expenditures in East Asia and the Gulf states, for example. But it's not going to happen in isolation. It means that our publishing, that our scholarly communication more broadly is part of a much larger ecosystem. And as stakeholders in that ecosystem, we can certainly be engaged with and partner with larger entities. Just one concrete example of that is the operations leaders on individual campuses, for example. And even those individuals are dealing with legacy institutions as individual institutions that can't redo a grid. We have to have a very game-changing leadership, truly at a national level, but certainly that will require some engagement from our individual institutions.
So on a different tactic, would it be helpful to reframe the conversations in our communities away from digital versus print to just content? Liz, you're nodding vigorously.
How about Karen? She had her hand up first.
Okay, Karen, yes.
Thanks, Liz. I'll just say quickly, yes, because we do know that people engage with digital and print differently. That is, that it tends to be superficial search with digital, and that if we want to encourage deep reading, we actually, to the detriment, haven't invested enough. Never mind, MUSE has a wonderful interface. JSTORs is actually pretty good too, but we haven't invested enough in good digital reading environments that actually encourage deep reading. And I think that's an enormous problem, really, really, really a problem. I mean, I think print is a fantastic technology. And as a sample size of students that I teach every year in my seminar, they always prefer print to digital. And when they only have digital access, it's a hardship, genuine hardship. And last year during the pandemic was really stressful for them, because even when they could get books, the engagement potential. So we've invested a lot in thinking about what are new ways that we can give people the opportunity to engage with digital. But actually, if we just think of these as compatible, even complementary technologies for access, I think it's much healthier and more productive for scholarship, for learning, really.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And yeah.
Okay, so another very different question. Arts publishing has often fallen behind with the push to open due to the limits on visual content. So how can we bring arts publishing along into these new models?
There are many possibilities for that. I'll just mention one. We're on barely the cusp of the development of augmented reality, virtual reality technologies. It is very clear, however, even this early, that those technologies are going to be game-changing for the way people experience a lot of things. The way they experience presence, AR/VR is bringing presence to distance learning, for example, or the sensory kind of experiences that are very central to AR/VR technologies are very integral to people experiencing art. This does not mean that all art is going to be AR/VR. It means that those technologies are actually going to create, are already creating new venues for the distributions of creative output through storytelling, through the visual and other sensory, for example, auditory experiences of artistic production. And to the degree that we can be deliberate and that we can be very anticipatory in the ways that we are trying to ensure that the technology is integrated into the creative and humanistic work that's happening, so that we're not in a situation where there's not been input and involvement in the development of this technology from humanities and social sciences and creativity, but that it's integral. To the degree that we can do that, we're going to see a really bountiful growth of the space for people to be able both to contribute the content in that domain and also to experience art.
Another one. I'd be interested in hearing specific speculations about what Open Back Better should look like for publishers, libraries, and scholarly communication stakeholders, especially in the context of Me Too and Black Lives Matter. Karen.
I think one thing we notice, even in HSS, where our resources are limited, and so our moves to open have to be really self-consciously strategic. We have absolutely seen that the push to open in a strategic way to serve communities, for example, in response to Black Lives Matter, in response to the enormous interest in my field in the 1619 project, that thinking about how we can open in ways that serve communities in need in that moment is really, has really been valuable. In other words, not thinking about content in a strategic need way and in response to communities and dialogue with communities, I think has been enormously helpful. I realize that all of my comments are about small scale solutions. And in part, I think that's because when we're talking about HSS, we are talking about quite specific fields and disciplines that have lots of difference. There's unbelievable diversity here. And small scale solutions are often a good choice. We don't need necessarily global solutions for everything.
Anyone else want to take that one on? Okay, so let's move on to a new one. How can we as stakeholders in scholarly communication help to transition more authors and editors, not just towards open access, but in general back towards nonprofit, academy, society-led publishers, and away from big commercial folks?
So I want to take this opportunity to just engage a little further what we were discussing. And this is in reference to Karen's comments. I welcome pushback, but it's a conversation. We don't have to agree. These are very complex challenges. I think there's room for all kinds of approaches, and we still will not have solved the problems because they're so complex. But I just want to clarify what I mean, that it will take more capital than ever before. And we don't have to agree about it. I just want to clarify. It will take more capital than ever before to fulfill our missions. Most of us work at not-for-profit institutions that participate by both necessity and deliberate design in benefiting from capital growth. So if your institution has an endowment, then that means your institution is participating in the ownership and the equity and capital that has growth potential. And that pays our salaries. It enables us to be able to have more inclusive approaches to who gets into our institutions, because it doesn't have to be limited to people who can afford it. It means that we can invest in new initiatives and efforts. But the biggest growth that's happening in GDP is in the digital space. And so one of the ways that we need to try to understand the what's actually before us and what the opportunity is with the nonprofit mission is understanding that the not-for-profit institutions have to create profit. The issue is your mission. Do you exist to profiteer? Is that your mission? Do you have a public-minded mission? But unless we want to shut down our institutions and lay off employees, we have to be profitable. And I think that one of the mistakes that we've made as a society was treating technology as a STEM issue. Technology is not a STEM issue. It's a human issue. It's a comprehensive issue. The biggest technology challenge that our world is facing, well, I'll say that our world is facing right now, is actually around how do we achieve democratic outcomes? How do we not only preserve, but how do we enhance democratic institutions, given the fact that we have to govern technology? And that means that we have to have humanists who are involved in both the development, the design of technology broadly conceived, and also its regulation. The non-technical aspects of the technology are the hardest problems that we have to find. And that's why we have to have humanists participating in the leadership of it. But we also need not-for-profit entities to be in a position where we take what we have been doing in the past, and that is participating in equity markets so that we can afford to fulfill our mission. And we have to translate that into the equity opportunity space for the most high value growth, and from a political sense, from the most urgent and sensitive areas where we have to figure out how to shape this technology in a way that's inclusive and gets us the kind of outcomes we need. And so that means that if we exclude not-for-profit entities from participating in ownership and in equity of the most high value growth area that the human race has ever seen, it will ensure that we will not be sustainable in this future. So that's what I mean when I say that we have to game change. We can't remain tenants. If our only game plan is just to be a tenant in this digital space, we don't have to agree about it. But I do think we have to recognize that is not viable, and we will not be able to afford to continue to exist as legacy institutions.
Okay, there's so very much to think about here. So we're nearing the end of our time, and I believe that Kelly has a few remarks to wrap up and to send us on our way. So thank you so very much to all the panelists. This has been so thought-provoking, and I know it's difficult because we can't see the audience, we can't see their faces, we can't see their hands being raised, but I can just share with you that when I look at the questions coming in, they absolutely were engaged. I mean, very, very thought-provoking conversation, and I hope that lots of folks will go on to the breakout session so that we can continue talking. So Kelly, over to you.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for moderating such a fantastic panel. And thank you so much, Greg, Sylvester, Liz, Karen, and Francis for sharing your compelling perspectives and analysis. And thank you all for joining us today. I really hope you found the discussion as engaging and as inspiring as I did. All of us at Project MUSE really look forward to continuing these conversations with our partners in the scholarly publishing community. And as Karen Wolf just said, we must have a humanities perspective. So just a reminder that the pre-registered breakout sessions are starting in 15 minutes at 11:30 Eastern Time. All who registered should follow the link in the email from Phil Hearn. If you're not joining a breakout session and you are a MUSE participating publisher, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And be sure to check your email for the special passcode to access the meeting platform for tomorrow. If you're not a Muse participating publisher, we look forward to having you join us on Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern time for another fantastic panel discussion, community challenges, collaborative solutions, emerging library trends for publishers that will close out our week of programming. And lastly, if you missed our keynote speaker, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, yesterday, you can actually watch it on demand. Just navigate to the Windows link on the MUSE Meets platform to watch it. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.